Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Dining with Diabetes. We're on week number 2. Thank you, everybody, for coming back that was with us last week. And if you're new, we're really glad that you could join us this week. So again, my name, for those of you who might not remember, my name is Olivia Ferris, and I'm the Lawrence County Extension Agent for Family and Consumer Sciences. And then my partner in crime, my co-host, is Mandy Broderick, and she's the Lewis County Extension Agent for Family and Consumer Sciences. So I'm really excited to be working with her. So today we're going to be talking about carbohydrates and sweeteners. So last week we really looked at an overview of living with diabetes, what that entails, and we really got scientific about it. So today we're going to be looking more about those small changes or even big changes that you can make in your day-to-day life involving carbohydrates and sweeteners in order to help you manage your diabetes. We also want to reiterate today that Mandy and I are not doctors. If your doctor has given you instructions to do something specific, you should listen to your healthcare professional. We're here just to kind of make things easier, give you suggestions, recipes, but remember to always listen to your healthcare workers and physician. So last week, again, just an overview. I just want to review that any changes that you might have made over the last week from your SMART steps. So if you want to, in the chat box, or if you're watching this on Facebook later, just let us know what kind of goal you set for yourself, if you accomplished that goal or something that you've been thinking about working on. And remember those SMART goals, because we'll be coming back to those again every single week. Another thing I want to talk about is last week, what did you learn? Is there anything specific that really stood out to you or something that you really took away? That's something else you can put in the chat box. Just please feel free to share at any time any of this that I'm going over also. So the questions that we have here, though, just to get the conversation started: did the class last week increase your awareness of diabetes management techniques or tests? So is there anything new in that regard that you learned? What portion of your plate should be non-starchy vegetables? That's kind of a pop question there. And we will be going over that today if you don't remember. And then how did you do in accomplishing your SMART goals? So the first thing I wanted to go over is knowing your numbers. It's very important. While a lot of stuff that we're going to be talking about today involves food, we also need to keep in mind that there's a lot of math and numbers and some medical jargon that goes along with diabetes. So first is A1C. You need to make sure that every 3 or 4 months you're getting this checked. It also can be called hemoglobin A1C. Sometimes you see those two words together. So just make sure you're having that checked every 3 or 4 months. Your blood pressure test should be done during every doctor's visit. They usually do that anyway, but if they forget, don't be afraid to speak up for yourself. Say, hey, I'd really like to get my blood pressure checked while I'm here. And if you could let me know that number. Your cholesterol, your LDL and HDL, and your triglyceride blood test should be done annually. So every year you need to be having that done. And something I like to do when I have something that I know needs to be done every 6 months or every year, that's a really big gap to remember. If you have your phone with your calendar on there, or if you just even want to make a little mark in a planner or a calendar at home hanging on the wall, I really recommend that you mark those annual things down somewhere, because you don't always get reminders from your doctor, and it's important that you're getting those as needed. Your test for your kidney function, or your EGFR, that also needs to be done once a year. And then individuals with type 2 diabetes should have their eyes examined and dilated every year. Even individuals who are high risk for developing type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetic, they should also be getting their eyes checked. And just in general, you should be getting your eyes checked. But that exam needs to be done annually. You should do a foot examination, preferably daily, but at least every other day at home. And if you remember last week, Mandy really recommended laying a mirror on the floor and just kind of holding your foot over it. That's a really easy way to do that. And you probably would just need like a really small compact mirror. It wouldn't need to be anything large. But you should really be examining your feet daily. And then every time you go to your doctor, while they remember to check your blood pressure usually, they might not remember a foot examination. So don't be afraid to kind of speak up and say, hey, I'd really like you to check my feet today. Even if I don't think that there's a problem, I just think it would be good for you to see where we're at now, just in case there's changes in the future. So don't be afraid to ask your doctor. It's important that you do home glucose testing as advised by your doctor. Or even if you feel like you're a little off, don't be afraid to do that home glucose test. Let me check the chat real fast just to see if we have anything. Do we have anything, Mandy? Okay.
No, we're looking good.
Okay, thank you. Again, if you have any questions, just put them in the chat box. Okay, so we're surrounded by food choices. These are actually some of my favorites here that aren't really the best choice, but they're things that we all know taste really good. We have our donut selection right there, and we have a curly fry, and it's lunchtime right now, so I'm sure all that's looking really, really good to everybody. There's some peanut butter cups down there. So we're surrounded by food choices every single day, and the choices are both good and bad. And there's also some choices that we might think are good because of how they're marketed, and we'll get more into that later, but they're actually, you're just substituting one thing out for another that could be potentially harmful to your health. So today we're going to focus on carbohydrates, and we're going to learn how to make the best choices to balance your blood sugar. Okay. So what is a carbohydrate? So you've no doubt heard that word before, even if it's not in reference to diabetes. I feel like low carb diet, carbohydrate, carb counting, those are just like some buzzwords that we kind of hear a lot. But there's no doubt that you've heard the word carbohydrate a lot since learning that you have diabetes, but you may not have been told why it's important and why you should understand what they are. So carbohydrates are substances found in certain kinds of food that provide you with energy. So that sounds pretty good, right? Like it's giving us some energy. And our body actually runs off of proteins, carbohydrates, sugars, fats, things like that. So these are a lot of words we hear when we're talking about our diet. So they provide us with energy, and foods such as sugar and bread, they contain these substances, these carbohydrates, and they can also be referred to as carbohydrates. So a lot of times these words are kind of interchangeable a lot, even though they do have some distinct differences. So carbohydrates are broken down to glucose during digestion. And you're going to hear me say a lot of OS words today. So I'm going to say glucose, sucrose, fructose. Anytime you hear OS, think gross. That's what I say. So OS is gross. OS is sugar. So anytime you see a food label or hear somebody referring to OS is gross or OS is sugar. That's how I remember that one. But they're broken down in digestion, and then they're absorbed into the body, into the bloodstream, which is part of why, you're checking your blood for blood sugar, because it's all getting broken down and it's going throughout the body through the bloodstream. When someone has diabetes, their body does not use glucose the way that it should. You can help your body use glucose better by having consistent amounts of carbohydrate-containing foods at regular intervals. So that's why we tell people, even if you have diabetes, like don't be afraid to eat anything, because it's actually harmful for you to skip meals and not to eat. So make sure that you're eating consistently. Your healthcare team, that includes your doctor or maybe even a support group, something like that. But your healthcare team, they can help you determine how many servings you need per day, and the timing of those servings, because for different people, their body works differently, so you might need it at different times. So throughout this session, we're going to talk about carbohydrate servings. One carbohydrate serving is equal to 15 grams of carbohydrate. I know what you're thinking. What does that mean? How much is 15 grams? I'm going to actually break that down for you today. So keep in mind that both starchy and sweet foods are rich in carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are an essential nutrient, but too many carbohydrates, whether starchy or sweet, can cause hyperglycemia and damage your blood. So a lot of times we think, oh, carb, that means bread. So actually carbohydrates are in several foods, including fruits and vegetables. Okay, so how do carbohydrates work in the body? So a really easy way to think about it is it's like fueling your car with gas. So carbohydrates help fuel us in our body. So just something that you can put in the chat box. Can you name some of the foods that raise your blood glucose, so raise your sugar? I'll give you all a minute. If you're watching this on Facebook, again, don't be afraid to put some comments in the chat box. We'd love to hear what you say. Tomatoes, carrots, apples, yes, potatoes. I do have a tip to help with potatoes at the end. Okay, those are all really good answers. Oh, we got one more. Breads, yes. Okay. So some other things, so bread for sure, fruit juices can be really high, desserts, cakes, cookies, pies, sweet beverages. Usually they come in a carbonated form. I won't say the name, but sweet beverages, even sweet tea. They actually all have carbohydrates in them that can help raise your blood glucose levels. And sometimes these are just a snack, they're not even a meal. So glucose or blood sugar is required to fuel the body and the brain. However, we need to learn how to best regulate that so that we can live a balanced and healthy life. So when I say carbohydrate, just think fuel for your body, just like fuel for your car. There we go. Okay, so if you have seen this before, can somebody give me like a thumbs up to see if you've ever seen this picture before? It's graphic. Oh, cool. Okay, great. That's awesome. That's really great that you've seen this before. So the USDA has created a guide to help us choose healthy food. It was actually introduced in 2010. Does anybody remember like the My Pyramid or like the Food Guide Pyramid, any of those? Okay, I see a lot of head shaking. So actually the USDA created this so that way we can more easily understand what size portion we're supposed to have. So in the past, when we had a pyramid, you had like a sliver or a block of grains or dairy or fruit or whatever. But it's like, you kind of look at that and it's kind of hard to translate that into food. So they reevaluated and readjusted and they made MyPlate. And MyPlate actually you can visually see what your plate should look like for a balanced meal. So half of it is fruits and vegetables. We have about a quarter of grains, a little less than a quarter of protein, and then of course our dairy. So this was developed to help us better understand what we should be eating. Now, when you have diabetes, your plate might look a little different. And again, remember to consult your healthcare provider. So now I wanted everybody to see this. Has anybody seen this graphic before or something similar? Okay. I see a lot of head shakes. Oh, great. We're going to learn something new today. Okay. This is the plate method, and it's a tool for diabetes meal planning. So this was actually made in Idaho. So it's called the Idaho plate method, and it was designed to assist diabetics in meal planning. This plate method differs from MyPlate because this plate is half full of vegetables and fruits is outside of the plate. So before you look at this, half of your plate is fruits and vegetables, right? So with this Idaho plate method, half of your plate is vegetables and then fruit is kind of on the side, almost like an extra. So you might be saying to yourself, how can I eat that many vegetables? That's kind of a lot. Another thing too is you need to be eating non-starchy vegetables. So that's things like broccoli, spinach, think about leafy greens. So it's how can I get that much in my diet? That's kind of a lot. So just a few suggestions I had are you can have a salad with your meals. Spaghetti squash. Has anybody had spaghetti squash before? Thumbs up. Good. Okay, so if you would like a recipe for that, we'd be happy to send that out to you. But spaghetti squash is actually a really good alternative to regular pasta noodles. And you can eat them just the same with like a marinara or whatever you would like. Broccoli is another really good one. I really think just things that aren't potato, that's usually one that has a lot of starch in it. So filling half your plate with vegetables can also lower the calorie content. So has everybody heard the term calorie before in your daily calories? Now, depending on your gender and your weight and other chronic illnesses you may or may not have, your amount of caloric intake will vary, but usually food labels are based on the 2,000 calorie a day diet. So planning your meals, this can lead to weight loss. One thing, but however, that should not be the ultimate goal. Your ultimate goal should be having a more well-rounded and healthy lifestyle. So one thing I want to mention is that this plate and every plate is based off of a 9-inch plate. So a lot of our plates are not 9 inches, they're 12 inches plus. So just think about that. A good way to determine the size of a plate would just be to measure it from end to end. And if it's 9 inches, that's a 9-inch plate. So you just want the diameter. So this is all based on a 9-inch plate. That was something else I wanted to mention. And when we're talking about portions and portion distortion, a lot of times when we have a larger plate, we tend to put more food onto the plate because we're trying to fill it up. So if you start with a smaller plate from the beginning, you're more likely to pick a portion that is more what you're needing it to be. So around the correct measurement. So we don't walk around, or at least I don't walk around with measuring cups and tablespoons and teaspoons in my pockets all the time. That's not that's not what I do. I've got a lot in my purse, but not that. So if you don't have a measuring cup, that's no problem at all. So you can see a few pictures here where it's showing some different measurements, and I'm going to kind of walk you through those now. So serving sizes are very, very important for everyone. But what exactly is a serving, and what does that mean? So when we talk about carbohydrates in diabetic meal planning, we often talk about carbohydrate servings. As mentioned earlier, a carbohydrate serving is 15 grams. Carb servings include starchy foods like grains and starchy vegetables, dairy, non-starchy vegetables, fruits, and desserts. So we need to be looking at all of those when we're planning our meals. So one serving of starchy food is one slice of bread or half a bagel or a bun. So think about this. When you're eating a hamburger or a sandwich, you usually have 2 pieces of bread. So that's actually 2 servings right there of a carbohydrate. Or even if you're eating a bagel, each side equals 1 serving. If the starchy food is cooked, such as rice, potatoes, pasta, corn, green peas, etc., then 1 serving is 1/3 cup. And that's approximately the amount of a person with a cupped hand. So if you kind of cup your hand, and you can see in that picture there next to the pasta, that's going to be about your 1/3 serving. So kind of a nice tight cupped hand. Okay. A serving of fruit is 1 small piece of fresh fruit or half a cup of canned fruit or frozen fruit, or even half a cup of fruit juice. So usually when we grab orange juice in the morning, we're not grabbing a small little half cup or like what would fit in our hand. We're usually having a full glass. So that could be 2, 3, even sometimes 4 servings of fruit. So that's something we really have to be mindful of. But that half cup equals 4 ounces. So if you are drinking a 16-ounce glass, that's already our 4 servings right there. So 1 8-ounce cup of milk is 1 serving. So with our fruit juices and our fruit and canned fruit, 4 ounces is a serving. With milk, it's 8 ounces. If the milk is made into pudding or a frozen dessert, then it is half a cup or our small cupped hand again. Each of these serving sizes of starch, fruit, and milk raise blood sugar the same amount. So if you're measuring and you're getting them as close as possible, they're going to raise your blood sugar the same amount. Now, something else I want to mention down here on this picture at the bottom, it's showing some ranch dressing there, it looks like, and it has 2 thumbs up, and it says 1 to 2 tablespoons. Well, if you look at the top of your thumb, and there's that first line where your thumb starts to bend, a dollop of dressing or 1 tablespoon is the same as the top of your thumb. And that's technically a serving size of dressing. And I don't know about you all, but I put a little bit more than that dollop of one side. I see everybody's face. I put more than that on there. However, though, if you're thinking of an actual serving size of salad, you see those 2 cup pans there? That's the serving size of the salad. So if you're only having this much salad, that's probably plenty of dressing. Usually we're having 3 or 4 of these, and that's why we need 3 or 4 of these, we think, as dressing. But everybody always gets so mind blown when they find out that's 1 serving. 1 tablespoon is 1 serving of dressing. So just interesting. Yeah, that's a pretty good one. So here's some other things that can be really handy for you to use to measure serving sizes. So a stack of 4 dice equals 1 ounce of cheese. A deck of cards, so think about the size of a deck of cards. That's 3 ounces of meat. That's a serving. And sometimes my steaks are like 2 of those. So that's actually 2 servings of meat. But a baseball, or the size of a baseball, is 1 medium potato or fruit or cold cereal. So think how small, and I don't mean a softball, I mean a baseball. A compact disc. And I hope this reference, I think everybody on here knows what a CD is, but we might have to update this eventually. But a compact disc is about the size of a pancake, what a serving of a pancake should be. And I don't know, if you go to like a pancake restaurant, there are usually 2 or 3 of those. So just remember that just because you're eating 1 of something does not mean that you had 1 serving. You could have had 3 or 4 servings in 1 setting and not even realized it. Just remember that large portions, they do add up. And an extra 100 calories per day equals 10 pounds of weight gain per year. And I know 10 pounds doesn't seem like a lot, but in a couple of years, you know, there's 20 or 30 pounds, and then it kind of becomes more and more. Okay. So the plate method and meal planning. So earlier I talked about that plate method, the Idaho plate method, and it was just like a little graphic. Well, now this is what one of those plates would look like. So that actually looks like a pretty good meal. It's actually making me kind of hungry. Chicken sounds pretty good right now. But meal planning for people with diabetes is not easy. And there's no one size fits all that works for everyone, because everyone's diabetes is different. Everybody's healthcare plan is different. Using the plate method, no more than using the plate method, no more than 1/4 of the plate should be covered by starchy foods such as breads, grains, or potatoes. So here we see that there is 1/4 of a plate, and that looks like either rice or like couscous or some kind of grain like that. For heart healthy eating, no more than 1/4 of the plate should be covered in something from the meat group. So this looks like it's boneless, skinless chicken breast, and that's kind of one of our healthier meat choices. Not saying that we should never eat any of the others, but we should be incorporating those healthier choices as much as we can. Non-starchy vegetables should cover the rest of the plate. So these are some, I mean, that's a pretty good selection there. You have, it looks like carrots, and you have broccoli. And then it looks like maybe there's a few small potatoes sprinkled in, and those would be a starch, but you can see that the majority of the plate is the broccoli and the carrots. So we want to make sure we're getting those non-starchy vegetables. The small circle over here on the right-hand side, that represents a single serving of milk, and the one on the left over here represents a single serving of fruit. So a single serving of fruit, you know, that could be 1 apple. We talked about the 4 ounces of fruit juice. And just because this says milk over here does not mean it has to be milk. This could be yogurt. It could be cheese. I think that might be really good. Like put a little bit of cheese on that broccoli with this meal, or on your rice. Again, a little, not a whole 2-cup bag on that broccoli. But, you know, just you can incorporate your dairy in other ways besides drinking, like, you know, I picture that milk carton from school. So there's other ways to incorporate those. Okay, so cleaning is important for diabetes, but it takes time. Okay, this isn't something you're going to master overnight. There's a lot of trial and error. I do try to eat from all the food groups every day, and I teach this all the time. And I still don't get everything that I should every single day. We're all human. We're all living our lives. We've got a lot going on. And so sometimes food is something that it takes a lot of planning, and there's going to be a lot of trial and error, like I said. But one thing I really want to bring up here is talking about the non-starchy and the starchy vegetables. So we have examples of each here. It's very important to separate starchy vegetables from non-starchy ones. Starchy vegetables such as corn, peas, lima beans, and potatoes should be included in the starchy quarter of the plate, or what we might even think of as grains. But remember that starchy vegetables are high in carbohydrates and will raise your blood sugar levels. Non-starchy vegetables such as broccoli, tomatoes, spinach, and cucumbers are a great choice because they fill up your plate, and they're also going to make you feel full, and they do not have a great impact on your blood glucose reading. Fill half your plate with non-starchy vegetables. Note that while non-starchy vegetables are excellent source of many nutrients, including fiber, they're not free foods. So it's not that, I can just eat carrots and broccoli every single day and I'm not going to gain any weight or anything, because they do contain calories. And also how you prep those foods is really going to dictate what they do to your body. So are you adding some sugars? Are you adding some salts? Did you add that cheese? So just remember that as you're preparing them, that's going to change the composition of the food as well. So that's just something to keep in mind. I use turnips instead of potatoes. Oh, that's a good tip. Thanks, Joe. And this might be a good place for me to mention. So one thing you can also do with your potatoes, and this is not your free pass to eat potatoes all the time, but if you go ahead and slice them and soak them overnight and then drain them and rinse them, that's going to remove a lot of those water-soluble starches and potassium and things. So actually soaking your potatoes can kind of help. Again, not a free pass to eat potatoes all the time, but that is one thing when I do my diabetes support group that we tell people to soak their potatoes the night before. Okay. Okay. So fill your plate with 1/4 of meat or other proteins. So there's several other proteins listed here. Some really good ones are dried beans, peas, tofu, etc. So protein is very important. You need to be eating about 2 to 3 ounces of meat equivalent, or 1/4 of your plate. Meat such as beef, chicken, pork, eggs, and fish do not contain carbohydrates. One thing I will say with eggs, be careful of cholesterol. Remember, we're wanting to monitor everything on our body, not just sugar. This might encourage you to include large portions from animal proteins in the meal, but most meat contains saturated fat, which will increase your risk of heart disease. So when I think about saturated fat, I just think about, excuse me, a big, beautiful steak with like that nice big white piece all the way around it and kind of going through the middle. We call that marbling. And it just soaks up all that marinade and it makes it like just kind of fall apart. And while that tastes really good, and I know it does, and I come from a cattle family, trust me, I'm not hating on beef, we do need to be mindful of that. Because if it's solid in the pan when it cools, it's solid in your arteries. So whenever you make a roast, even like a pork roast, and you see that fat that kind of congeals at the top, that's what it does in your arteries, because our bodies are not, 400 degrees. So that's just something to keep in mind when we're selecting our meat. So I'm not saying completely cut those things out, but, be more mindful about it. So when you go and pick a steak, you can cut some of that fat away from the edge, and then you're only left with what's in the middle. And so that's really going to take some of that away. So that's just something to think about. Choose those leaner cuts of beef, leaner cuts of pork. Chicken's a really good option. Fish is a good option. It's just something to think about. But usually people are shocked when I'm like, if it's solid on the plate, it's solid in your arteries. Plant proteins are another good one. So there's things like dried beans, peas, tofu. They're a really good healthy choice. They do not contain carbohydrates, so they must be, they do contain carbohydrates, so they must be included in the carb count for the meal. Nut butters, that's peanut butter, almond butter, soy nut butter, all of those options, and seeds and nuts, they also contain proteins. But in diabetic meal planning, these foods are often considered fat rather than protein. And you just think about when peanut butter separates, that big slick of oil you get at the top. So just remember, these are going to go included in your fat group, if that's what you want to call it. These plant proteins are cholesterol free though, however. As a point of reference, the MyPlate recommendation ranges from 5.5 to 6.5 ounces equivalent per day of these items, depending upon the calorie need. 1 ounce equivalents, including 1 ounce of cooked meat, 1 egg, 1 tablespoon of peanut butter or almond butter, half a cup of tofu, or 1/3 cup of hummus. So hummus also goes in this group. Okay. So we need to fill 1/4 of our plate with grains or starchy vegetables. And I have a bunch listed here. We have bread, cereals, etc., etc. Foods in the grain group are high in carbohydrates, so be mindful of the serving size and learn what a serving of a carbohydrate really is. Carbs add up quickly. For example, a serving of rice or pasta is only 1/3 of a cup. And I know for going out to restaurants that are Italian or something, you're going to have your plate of pasta, you're going to have your bread that they brought to the table, and maybe you're going to eat all that together. So just be kind of mindful that 1/3 cup is truly 1 serving size. A serving of grains is roughly 15 grams of carbs. These may include bread, cereals, pasta, starchy vegetables, beans, and rice. So beans and rice can also be a protein, or the beans can, and then your rice can be included in your starch. So again, this is talking about some of these meals are combinations of different things. So while desserts should not be considered a healthy food option, if you are going to eat dessert, just remember it's probably going to take up the starch section of your plate, because a lot of those cakes and cookies and things like that are going to go under that starch category. Make sure that you talk with your healthcare team to determine the number of carbohydrate servings that you specifically need. A general recommendation, though, is 45 to 60 grams per meal for women, and 3 to 4 servings. That would be 3 to 4 servings. And then for men, it's 60 to 75 grams, and that's 4 to 5 servings. Okay. And then we have option to add a serving of fruit. And I know in the summertime, I just love fruit. And this is probably a good time to say, you know, with diabetes, I think a lot of times people think, well, there's food that I cannot have. Like, I cannot have this, I cannot have that. And it's not as much about what you cannot have, it's managing what you do have. So if you are going to eat fruit and you've made that choice to have fruit, then where can you supplement in other areas? So it's kind of just like a give and take situation. You know, you don't want to ever completely deprive yourself, because then you might end up gorging on that thing that you've been craving. So that's why I say this is all trial and error. And you know, you might want different things on different days. So don't ever think that you have to, unless your doctor has told you so, don't ever think that you have to completely deprive yourself. There's ways to do give and take on this plate. So fruits contain carbohydrates. Check with your healthcare team to determine the specific amount of fruit juice, etc. that you can intake daily. You may choose fresh fruit that's canned, fruit juice, or dried fruit. Whole fruit is preferred over juice, though, because of the fiber content and other nutrients. And a lot of times that stuff is taken out when it's juiced. 100% fruit juices can be used, but be very careful about juice when you're shopping. Because if it does not say 100% fruit juice, a lot of times they're supplementing it with other things. Something else I really recommend is look at that food label and see how much added sugar is in that juice, because naturally occurring sugar is not something that had to be put in there. So you think like strawberries, apples, watermelon, they have a real natural sweetness to them. So if something says 100% apple juice and you turn the label around and there's no added sugar, then that's probably a really good option. But if you see something that has like, 250 milligrams of added sugar per serving, that's not even for the whole container, you're looking at something that has been supplemented with a lot of added sugar. So that's just something to look out for, especially in our fruit juices. They're usually culprits for that. As a point of reference, the MyPlate recommendation ranges from 1.5 to 2 cups or equivalent per day, depending on your need for calories. A half cup equivalent is 1 small piece of fruit or half a cup of cut up fruit, 4-ounce snack size of canned fruit. So, you get an 8-ounce can, only half the can is 1 serving, and then half a cup of fruit juice. And now we're going to talk about milk. I'm going to actually call this dairy probably while I'm talking, just because it doesn't have to be milk. It can be yogurt, it can be cheese, it could be ice cream, although that's not our first choice, but sometimes I know that we eat it. But did you know that milk and yogurt contain carbohydrates? A lot of people don't. They just think, bread, that's where our carbs come from. So you need to, again, add these into your carbohydrate intake. So fat-free and low-fat milk are good choices because they contain fewer calories and are lower in saturated fats. If you drink whole milk now, I recommend, if you're trying to get down to a smaller one, to gradually take yourself down from the whole milk, because it does taste different. I know it does. Some people say there's no difference. I taste it. I know there's a difference. So you might want to start with drinking 2% and do that for a while, and then gradually get down to 1%. I don't really drink skim milk. I know some people like that, but I usually get 1 or 2% depending on what my store has. But they're fewer in calories, they're fewer in saturated fats. And also a note here, don't be afraid to get the 1 or 2% milk just because it doesn't say vitamin D on the packaging, because vitamin D is actually added into milk. And all milk has vitamin D added into it. But you should also be trying to get your vitamin D from other sources, not just milk, because vitamin D is broken down by the sun. And so when it's in a clear container, if it's been in light too long, the vitamin D has already left the milk. So that's just something to note there. You're still getting your vitamin D if you don't get whole milk. That's just kind of a marketing thing that they use to sell more whole milk, actually. So they contain the same amount of vitamins and minerals as other milks, with higher fat contents, and they have the same amount of carbohydrates. So note that 1 cup of plain low-fat yogurt contains 15 grams of carbohydrates. But you can check the carbohydrate content on select varieties that contain fruit, and have had other special preparations. And yogurt is something else that you really need to look for that added sugar. I always get plain yogurt, and I was buying vanilla for a while, but then when I looked, they added a whole bunch of sugar into the vanilla flavoring, and there's really not that much of a difference in taste. So my recommendation, if you like those fruitier yogurts and you notice that they've added a lot of sugar, cut up your own fresh fruit and put it in there. If you like the vanilla taste, you could maybe even add a little bit of vanilla extract to your yogurt and stir it in there. There's things you can do. And doing it at home, no matter if you're cooking a recipe or if you're just preparing for a meal plan that you're doing, anytime that you can do some of those extra steps for yourself at home instead of having it prepackaged and pre-prepared, that's usually better, because you can control the sugar and the sodium and the fat that's going into it. Whereas when you buy it already pre-done, yes, it's convenient, but you don't have as much control of what's being put into it. So again, 1 cup of yogurt plain, 8 fluid ounces of milk, that's going to be our serving. I've talked about food labels a lot, and I'm sure as diabetics, you all have paid attention to food labels before. At least I hope you have, because they're very, very important, and they contain a lot of great information. So if you are carbohydrate counting as meal planning, as a meal planning method, or if you just want to know how many carbohydrates are in your food, you need to be able to read the nutrition facts label. So there's a picture of one here. It's found on almost all packages of food sold in this country. Look at the portion on the label, and it'll tell you how many carbohydrates are on there per portion. And this can help you determine how it's going to affect your blood glucose. Total carbs and the sum of the fiber, sugar, and starch in the food are also found here. However, only sugar and starch break down the glucose and can affect blood glucose. Be sure to check the serving size on this label and see if it is close to the amount that you ate, no matter what food you're eating. If you ate more, you must include the extra carbohydrates for this meal. So you notice in this container, you can see at the top, it's in green. The serving size is 1 cup, okay? But the servings per container is 2. So if you actually ate this entire container, you're going to have 500 calories, not just 250. And then something that's really great there is it tells you that for the 250, 110 of them are from fat. So that's just something to look at there. There's 5 grams of sugar. That's down there in the white below the blue that says dietary fiber, which actually, whatever this label is from, you can see there's no dietary fiber there either. So it might not be the best choice. A serving of this, a serving of macaroni and cheese has 31 grams total of carbohydrates and does not have any fiber. So this is from a macaroni and cheese label. It has 31 grams total carbohydrate and does not have any fiber. It has 5 grams of sugar. So the other 26 grams are starch, which we probably could have guessed that with macaroni and cheese because of the noodles. So how many carbohydrates is this? And I know that's like doing math really quickly in your head, but it's going to be 2 servings of carbohydrates. A serving of this macaroni and cheese is going to be 2 carbohydrates. So when you're meal planning, you would have to remember that you've had 2 carbs for the day during this meal, not just 1. Be sure to look at the total carbohydrate, not just the sugars, to see if the food will raise your blood sugar. So remember that sugar is not the only thing linked to diabetes. Okay, so that's kind of all we have about carbohydrates. Before I move into sweeteners, did anybody want to, share anything or have a question? If you did, feel free to put it in the chat box. If not, that's okay. And I'm going to go ahead and start getting into artificial sweeteners. Okay. So we have several pictured here. Does anybody use any of these? I see a lot of head shaking. What is the net carb stuff? Let me go back. I saw your question. Sorry, I'm trying to. I saw your question about net carbs, and I'll get back to it at the end because it's not letting me, for some reason, go back to some of this. Unless, Mandy, if you want to type an answer in the box for. Okay, so artificial sweeteners. I have several listed here. So artificial sweeteners are used often by those who want to reduce the calories and carbs in the food. There are many artificial sweeteners on the market. So we're going to discuss some of the most common ones. There might be more out there, but these are just the ones that I kind of knew off the cuff. So aspartame, also known as natural sweet, I have it there, or equal, is very little, it has very little aftertaste, but do know that it's 200 times sweeter than sugar. So it doesn't have a lot of aftertaste, but it is very, very sweet. So the next one I want to talk about is Sweet and Low, or Sacchartin is the generic name, and it's often used as a brown sugar substitute, a sugar twin, a sweet thing, and it's a sweet thing. It's very stable for baking, but it does have a noticeable aftertaste if you use it in large quantities. So if something you were baking asked for 2 cups of sugar, you're probably going to taste the Sweet and Low. And it's 300 times sweeter than sugar. So it's very, very sweet tasting. ace sulfame potassium, also known as sweet one, has less aftertaste, but it's more sustainable for baking than the Sweet and Low or the for the NutraSweet. So it's more stable for baking when it's heated. So aspartame actually breaks down when it's heated, whereas the acesulfame potassium does not. It's 200 times sweeter than table sugar. Sucralose or Splenda is made from sugar with certain chemical changes. It has the same volume and taste as sugar and is stable when heated. Brown sugar blends are also available, and this is 600 times sweeter than table sugar. So just remember that when you're cooking. Stevia may also be sold under the names such as Only Sweet, Pure Via, Sweet Leaf, and Truvia. It's stable for baking, but check the packaging as many vary from one brand to another. And it also depends on if you get a liquid or a packet or if you're going to have loose powder. Generally, though, the substitute is 1/4 of a teaspoon, so it's not very much, for a half packet of stevia. So for every 1/4 teaspoon or half packet of stevia for every 1 teaspoon in a recipe. So if a recipe calls for 1 teaspoon of sugar, you only need 1/4 of the stevia. That's what all that mumbo jumbo means. There's also some other types of sugar. Sugar alcohols are something else I wanted to mention. So sugar alcohols actually are not a terrible thing, especially in chewing gum, because it prevents cavities. However, if you eat a whole lot of candy, and this has actually happened to people that I know, they saw sugar-free on the candy packaging. So they thought, oh, I have diabetes, this is sugar-free, I can eat as much as I want. And then they had a bathroom emergency. So just remember, it is a diuretic, and it will have to make you go to the restroom. So just because something is sugar-free does not mean that you can gorge on it and eat a whole bunch of it. So functions of sugar versus sweeteners. So sugar is sweet to taste. It's when you're baking, it's going to add color. It's going to add tenderness. It's going to add moisture. It's going to actually help with volume. And a lot of times when we think about that golden brown color, when we're making, like, I just picture like a beautiful like bundt cake, like coming out of the pan and it's all brown. A lot of that comes from the sugar. Some of it is from the eggs too, but some of that color comes from the sugar. So when we're using artificial sweeteners, we're using it for the taste because we want it to taste sweet. So a lot of times, something that's made with an artificial sweetener, if adaptations to the other ingredients have not been made, it's not going to be as moist. It's probably going to be a different color than what you normally expect. You know, if you make cookies with an artificial sweetener, they're probably going to come out like hockey pucks unless you've like adjusted the oil or the eggs or some other things in that. So just remember, while it's a good substitute, if you would like something sweet, it is not an exact replication of what all sugar does in recipes. So tips for using artificial sweeteners. So check the official website of your sweetener. They're going to have all kinds of tips on there, and they're probably also going to have recipes. And these recipes are probably going to actually work really well because they've paid people a whole lot of money to test them and find something that actually works. So they've kind of taken some of the guesswork out of there for you. But by all means, don't be afraid to adapt a recipe. And at any time, if you have a question about adapting something, you can always call your local extension agent or me or Mandy. We're always available. You can usually reduce the amount of sugar and fat by 1/3 to 1/4 in cookies. So again, you can reduce the fat, but you have to remember what it's going to do to the consistency. Quick breads and pies can be changed and adjusted really without affecting the end product very much, especially pie fillings, because when we're making a pie filling, you know, we're wanting it to be sweet. We're not necessarily doing it so it'll, you know, look a certain way, because usually we have that top crust that goes on the top. This may not work well with cakes though. You should not replace more than 1/2 cup of the total amount of sugar with artificial sweeteners. So if it calls for 2 cups of sugar, then ideally 1 1/2 cup would be table sugar and the other half cup would be artificial sugar if you're adapting just one of your recipes that you've had for a long time. And that is for consistency reasons. Now, you might be able to get up to 50 or 75% of it switched over to the sweetener, but just know it's probably going to change the end product, either in taste or color or something like that. So artificial sweeteners need to be used in small amounts at first and then increased gradually over time when working on a recipe. So that way you don't make it like overly sweet. Like we said earlier, some of this stuff is 600 times more sweet than table sugar. So you might accidentally try to be making it, the same way you've always made it. And then when somebody eats it, it like knocks their teeth out because it tastes so sweet. So just remember when you're making stuff with artificial sweeteners to adjust the recipe gradually before you find something that works for you. When two different classes of artificial sweeteners are combined, so for example, earlier we talked about stevia, sweet and low, all these other ones. Saccharin or aspartame, those are the scientific names for some of these, or the acesulfame, potassium, or aspartame. When you mix those together, sometimes you have better results because they are different chemically, and they're going to work together. So just remember that, but you can combine some of your sweeteners. Some sweeteners work better in cold items rather than heated items, which is kind of interesting to me because a lot of times when I think artificial sweetener, I think coffee or hot tea. So, for example, we know that aspartame loses its sweet taste when exposed to high heat. So that's why sometimes if you're sweetening with aspartame, you only might need half a pack of sugar in your coffee, but then you need 3 or 4 of those aspartame packets to get it to taste the same. So just remember that some things change in hot and cold temperatures. And that's something else you can look at your website, like recommendations from your company on what recipes they use it in and etc. But when you combine it with another sweetener, that can actually help with that also. So if you had a jar where you had aspartame in it and another artificial sweetener of a different type, then you might not need as much if you're putting it in your coffee. So compared to sugar, sugar substitutes and sugar alcohols are fewer in calories. Sugar alcohols can prevent tooth decay. They can be similar in texture, which is really helpful because I know eating just isn't flavor, it's texture, it's what we smell, it's what we see. You can use, it says here, little to no insulin sometimes when eating these foods, depending on your diabetes. But again, remember, especially sugar alcohol, it acts as a laxative, does. So be careful in how much of that you use. You are warned here, folks. So other recipe alternatives. This is actually one of my favorites, applesauce. You can use that in the place of like sugars and oils in your foods. It works really well. You can actually use other fruit purees. You think you make banana bread, you use bananas, and that acts as like a sweetener to it also. So fruit juice, applesauce, and fruit puree can be really good alternatives. However, remember, if you've added these in, then that might count as your serving of fruit for the day. So just remember that you are adding fruit into this, and it is going to change the sugar content. It is going to change the calories. This is just a little warning down there. Fat-free products may be high in carbohydrates. So usually there's some kind of trade-off when you see like fat-free or low-calorie or low carbohydrate. My grandma always said, if it's too good to be true, it's too good to be true. So if there's like a product and it's got like bright red, I can almost picture it. And it says fat-free, low carb, smart choice, low, just be weary of that. So make sure you're looking at those food labels for those trade-offs, especially on, and I think, I put it here with the fruit and the applesauce and things like that, because you might find like low sugar applesauce, but they've pumped it full of something else. So that's why it's really important to make sure you're getting those juices and purees that are 100% fruit juice or 100% fruit. And that's important for kids too, just in general. But I know I've dumped a whole lot on you all. This kind of a lot of numbers and a lot of things. Don't forget that we're going to be sending out this PowerPoint. And if you have any questions during the week, I mean, me and Mandy, we're working remotely a lot right now, so we're always on our computer. So please feel free to message us at any time about anything that we've talked about today. But in saying that, I just wanted to say that remember, it's give and take. There's going to be balance. You need balance. So not only do you need to eat right, you need to make sure you're exercising. You know, make sure you're talking to your healthcare provider. Make sure you're testing your sugar the way you're supposed to. Please take your medications the way you've been instructed by your physician. Even if you think you're cured and you feel better, what is actually happening is the medicine's going to let you maintain. So please, you know, do as your doctor says. Okay. Exercise is an important part of healthy lifestyle. Exercise and diet work together. That's why these fad diets that say if you don't eat anything all day and you don't have to exercise, or you eat a lot all day long and you don't have to exercise, or you don't eat and then you exercise, they don't work. They can be pretty dangerous. Actually, when you go off of them, you gain a lot of your weight back and sometimes even more because it's really affected your metabolism. So just make sure that it's just a balance of healthy eating and exercise, okay? Aim for 150 minutes a day of physical not 150 minutes a day, a week, 30 minutes a day, if at all possible, but 150 minutes a week. And your 30 minutes doesn't have to be all together. So if you want to take a walk when you wake up in the morning for 15 minutes, and then do your bicycling, you know, during lunch or during dinner time, or if you like to lift weights to kind of get you going, you don't have to do all 30 minutes all together. So you can just add it up throughout the day. But also check with your physician before you start any new exercise activity. And don't forget, you know, a lot of times when we're dealing with diabetes, we also have other health concerns that we have to worry about and deal with. I know, for example, my dad, he has hypertension also. So he has high blood pressure, his cholesterol is not that great, and he has diabetes. So when he exercises, he really has to watch and see that he's doing cardio and doing specific types of exercises to also help with that. So make sure that you talk to your physician when you're starting a new exercise program. Make sure it's safe, make sure it's something that's going to work for you. But also just a plug here, make sure it's something you enjoy. Because if you just start making yourself run every day and you hate running, you're eventually going to quit. So make sure it's something fun. I really recommend walking with some light weights and walking with a friend, because that really, really helps, or a neighbor. And I know we have social distancing right now, so you can stand your 6 feet apart. But I think anytime you can exercise with a group or a friend, it kind of helps both of you out. So that's a recommendation. Okay, so I've included today a farmer's market squash saute recipe. And this is approved as a diabetic-friendly recipe from our Plate Up Kentucky Proud partners at the University of Kentucky. When you get the email, you will get this recipe card. As you can see here, it actually has a lot of the things we talked about today. So it has whole grain rotini pasta. You could sub out for some spaghetti squash. Or even if you cut summer squash into large chunks and added more of those to this recipe, you could sub out the pasta completely. But if you can tell here, the whole grain pasta is only 2 cups of an entire sauteed skillet. So it's a really small amount of pasta. So whenever you're doing these dishes, pasta doesn't always have to be the star. It can just be kind of a side note. It has chicken breast in it, which we talked about. That's, boneless, skinless chicken breast is a good meat option. Little bit of olive oil, and then there's all kinds of vegetables in this. So we have squash, we have zucchini, we have carrots. And remember, carrots are one of our good choices. And then it has some flavoring, some Alfredo and some Parmesan. So that's kind of up to you how much of that you want to put in there. So I do have this recipe. Don't worry about having to hurry to write it down. You will get it in an email. But I thought I'd share that today. We're coming to the close of our program. I've only got a few slides left. I can't believe it's already been an hour. Thank you, guys. You've really paid attention. It's been great. So just talking about our SMART goals again, remember they're SMART, specific, measurable, obtainable, relevant, and timely. So if you didn't get a chance to write a goal last week, that's perfectly fine. That's something you can work on this week. But try to set like a SMART goal for yourself, either something you can accomplish by the end of this class. Maybe it's just a goal that you learned something today, like that half my plate should be vegetables. So maybe that your goal is that you want to add one more vegetable to your diet, like a new vegetable that's a healthy choice. So that's just something you can do. We'll be talking about our SMART goals, especially by the end of this class. We'd really like to hear what you all set for yourself and if you accomplished it or not. So just remember that if a goal is specific and measurable and it's relevant to you and it's something that you can actually do in a timely manner, it's going to be more successful. And I just wanted to end with a few useful websites. Again, you're going to get this on an email, so don't feel like you have to hurry up and write down these big, long things. So some useful websites here, the Calorie Counter, or the Calorie Control Council. They have like a calorie counter thing that you can do, like do your math to see how many calories are in something. The Mayo Clinic, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and the American Diabetes Association. So those are really, really good resources that we have online. And the good thing about them all being online right now is that a lot of us are stuck at home. So that's like really good, reliable resources that we can look into at home. So looking at next week, woo, exciting. We're going to be talking about fats and sodium. So that's going to be a good one. So whenever we talk about the three things that we really need to manage, fat, sodium, and sugar, I think we're hitting all of them in this series. So it's going to be really great. And then we're going to be talking about some heart healthy tips. We'll have another recipe for you that's diabetic friendly from Plated Up Kentucky Proud. I'm also going to do a plug here. If you have a farmer's market near you, that is, that's a great way to support Kentucky Proud and local farmers. It would be great to make that recipe with materials from the farmer's market. Just going to throw that out there. And those are just my acknowledgments. So thank you all so much for joining us today on this one. I think I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but we'll hang out here for some questions. And if you're on Facebook, go ahead and put your questions down in the comments below.